How's it going, guys? If you're new here, welcome to this podcast episode with Justin, Astro, Elliott. I cannot wait for you to hear it. This is the Talk4 Podcast. And if you're a returning subscriber, guys, welcome back. I'm delighted to bring you another fantastic episode. And before we go live and I show you this podcast episode, I just want to say that incredible guests like this one today are made possible by the subscriber base that I have, because I can then go to these people and say, hey, look, I got this amount of people checking out the show. This is going to be super worth it for you to come on here and have an impactful conversation to display to them. Let's do it. And then I just get more and more yeses and comebacks from these people because it gets more and more valuable for them. So I'm going to ask you if you can do the same today. If you're new here, please do take the 2 to 3 seconds it takes, honestly, to just hit that subscribe button and support this channel. It's completely free and it helps me more than you'd ever know. And if you're someone who is a returning subscriber too, please do leave a rating and a review. That also massively helps and gets the show bumped up those search results so that loads more people can see it. Guys, thank you very much. I'm going to take you over to this insanely cool episode now. Fights on. See you over there. Astro, how you doing, man? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing phenomenal. Thanks for having me on, Louis.
Absolute pleasure. And honestly, yeah, like we discussed, we've got a pretty tight packed network of people that we know, and just phenomenal to have you on the show here today. I'm so excited, and just so we can kind of catch up with you and figure out where you are nowadays, what you get up to, and obviously a bit about who you are. Elevator pitch kind of style, 30 to 60 seconds, just a bit about who you are, what your day job is, and just a little intro into the life of you and the things you've done.
Absolutely. Thanks, Louis. I'd say I've probably defined myself by 20 years of Air Force service at this point. I'm currently an active duty colonel in the U.S. Air Force. I work at NORAD, which is out in Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs, Colorado, on defense of the United States as the current operations officer. And I've been in the Air Force for, like I said, about 20 years. I commissioned out of ROTC at Yale University, joined the Air Force, became an F-15E pilot, flew in combat as a Strike Eagle pilot, went to weapons school, and then kind of crossed over to the test pilot world after that. Flew the F-35, the new Advanced Eagle, and then commanded a test squadron, and then commanded a second squadron as Thunderbird 1 for the Air Force. And then here we are now in Colorado.
Such an impressive career. And I have to ask, before we get into the questions then, as a young you, if you could go back and say this is what you were going to do as an older version of you to the young version of you, would you say that would be the absolute just pinnacle dream job? Or talk to me about that.
What's funny is, I don't know that young me would have had a clue what kind of opportunities the Air Force ended up offering me growing up. I joined the Air Force wanting to fly airplanes, and it's given me a whole lot more than that. So
Yeah.
I think we'll probably get into that a little bit more, but it's been an interesting journey. I don't know that young me would have known that that was out there.
Well, I mean, it's been a hell of a journey, and if I was you, I'd be incredibly proud of what you've done so far, and I know it's only going to keep expanding on that career. So let's go back to the beginning then. Backstory is always a great place to start with things like this. Then, so what kind of inspired you initially to get a career in the Air Force? How did your time at Yale, particularly as a D1 swimmer and a mechanical engineer student, shape that path to becoming a fighter pilot? And especially just, was it a you thing? Were you always into aviation, or was that a family thing? Just kind of talk to me about that.
Okay. All right, Louis, we got to go back a lot farther than college, though. All right. So, um, my parents actually immigrated to the United States. They were Canadians. In fact, they were Canadians until I was about 30 years old. So I was sort of an accidental American when it all started off. I was raised in Houston, Texas, though. So that's where I grew up. And for some reason, from the very, very beginning, I mean, I'm talking 3 years old, I loved drawing pictures of space. This is very hard to explain now that I look back. In fact, my mom, we just moved to Colorado. My mom just brought out all that stuff. She wanted me to see what I used to be into. And yeah, I have like paintings that I did of the space shuttle sitting against a black background. Every story I wrote was about space. I don't know what it was. I actually think it's likely, if you look at the timing, that I probably saw a news clip on Space Shuttle Challenger in its unfortunate accident back in '86,
Mm.
that spurred that. But for me, it was all space. That was the passion. And as I grew up, I realized that to be an astronaut, which was I would say solidly the dream of 3-year-old me, that I was unfortunately grossly underqualified. That I had a lot of things to do first, between first grade and going to space.
Yeah.
And what I realized, being in Houston, you're right there. You're right there with the astronauts in Johnson Space Center, and you can see that stuff. And when you look at their backgrounds, almost all of them were test pilots in either the Air Force or the Navy. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I got to do that. Now I had, like I said, my parents, no military background in the family. Um, there wasn't a lot of guidance coming from their side, but they were extremely supportive of whatever I wanted to pursue. Which, when I look back, now as a dad, that's amazing that they were willing to let me pursue that military track to this absolutely lofty and impossible goal of eventually going to space for the U.S. Um, so to pull all that together, that inspiration, that kind of beacon for me was there from the time I understood how an astronaut becomes an astronaut, and I chased that all the way through high school, um, really just by giving everything I had to whatever I was involved in. You can't really change your activities once you get into high school, but you can pursue them a lot harder. So for me, that was swimming, flying. Academics were very important to me as well. And I was fortunate to be able to pull all that together in my senior year and get into Yale University as a swimmer. And when I got to school, I had sort of two things going on at once. I was a swimmer for the school. I was also an engineering student because that was, I knew that was really the only path to continue forward through that flight test side of the Air Force, and into eventually space. So I pursued engineering, I pursued swimming, and then I did what's called ROTC, which in the United States is Reserve Officer Training Corps, or the ability to have the Air Force pay for college for you, and then you owe 4 years on the backside. And I'll tell you, like, looking back 20 years later, that 4 years is nothing. It's an incredible opportunity. But 18-year-old me didn't know that. So 18-year-old me thought I was signing up for just the longest commitment in human history, 4 years of service. Um, and I'll tell you another kind of interesting vignette through this era is I was chasing all of this, knowing that I did not meet the vision requirements to even be an Air Force pilot. So I had pretty bad vision back then. This was the early 2000s. I had, for those who wear contacts, like a negative 5.5 prescription. It's pretty bad.
Right.
And when I was a sophomore in college, I knew that the next year they were going to make pilot selections for the Air Force. Um, and what's funny about this is, up till that point as a sophomore, I knew I wanted to fly, like that passion at that point. I wanted to fly jets. I wanted to pursue this dream, but it was impossible. So I knew that really I was going to be an engineer in the Air Force. And I even considered possibly going into law for the Air Force, to serve that time commitment. I knew I couldn't fly as much as I wanted to. Well, in 2003, the Air Force changed its policy and allowed laser surgery for the first time. And I'll never forget this. They changed the policy on February 6th. And on March 6th, I was in the surgeon's office figuring out how to get laser eye surgery to actually pursue this dream for real. And for the first time, it opened up this possibility that, like, it could actually happen. Like, I might actually be able to fly
Oh,
for the Air Force. So I can't tell you what that did for me, Louis, to have that little bit of karma work out, and to be able to suddenly be able to chase this dream for real was incredible. And it was a real open door.
that is absolutely amazing. And well, I mean, I'm no Sherlock Holmes, and I don't work at Scotland Yard. But if I draw a few dots, I'm assuming that the call sign Astro probably has something to do with all this. Then.
You know what's funny about Air Force call signs? As cool as they're supposed to sound, and as much as we would want to assume that, they're almost never about anything good like that. You can yeah, we try to have some kind of duality involved. So, yes, I grew up in Houston. We have a baseball team called the Astros. Yes, I wanted to be an astronaut. All that stuff is there. But the real story behind that call sign is that when I took off at nighttime in an F-15E for the first time with night vision goggles, when I dropped those goggles and stars, planets, and airplanes all looked exactly the same in green for the first time, I chased a star instead of my flight lead and ended up split by 70 miles in full afterburner trying to chase a star down. So they named me Astro for trying to chase a star.
That's
There's
brilliant.
always a double meaning behind these things, and it's never the good one that makes it to the top, you know?
Oh, that's hilarious. Oh my God. I never would have guessed that. I mean, looking at the call sign, I thought that's just got to be about, the astronaut stuff. And obviously we'll talk about it in question 4 a bit and stuff too, about that, the big decision and everything. But I would have sworn my life it was something to do with that. But that's absolutely hilarious and total fighter pilot-esque typical stuff right there. But okay, so moving on with that career then. So obviously, commander of the 59th Test and Evaluation Squadron. Sounds like you've got sights set on becoming an astronaut. You've got to be a test pilot first to go through in that direction then. So you oversaw all 6 fighter attack jets in one squadron. How did you approach leading such a diverse and high stakes unit? Talk to me a bit about what it was like, what you were doing there, and just give us some cannon fodder for it.
You bet. The 59th was an incredible era in my life. You talk about the dream squatter, like the one that if I could communicate back to 3-year-old me and say, hey, this is what you really should do with your life, I would have said, command the 59th Test and Evaluation Squadron. I mean, it's an unbelievable opportunity. If you can kind of imagine we have about 10 of each fighter type. Now the numbers vary a little bit across the board, but that's 10 A-10s, 10 F-15Es, 10 F-15Cs, 10 F-16s, 10 F-22s, and 10 F-35s. So this is like it's a super squadron.
It's a lot of
And
money.
on top of that, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and it's a lot of responsibility. So this squadron is where all test funnels through before it goes to the field. So if you're going to flight test anything on a U.S. fighter jet of any type, it's going to flow through the 59th Test and Evaluation Squadron because it's a fairly adult squadron. You've got a very high level of expertise, people who graduated from either fighter weapons school or from test pilot school in the Air Force in their weapons system who have graduated to a point where they are either the test director of that weapon system or a project manager for one of these major projects that take years, to put new equipment, technology, weapons, flight controls even onto these airplanes.
Mm.
So you can imagine all that centralized in one place at Nellis Air Force Base in Vegas. Just a dream. On top of that, though, the squadron has a mission of collecting data throughout the test enterprise. And this is where it got interesting for me. So when I took command of the 59th and had it was the dream job, right? Like we were going to get to fly and test everything out there. Um, what really hit me was that we were doing it wrong. And despite, and this is life, right? This is why we as commanders are not apps. We don't just do what the code says. We have to look at the enterprise. We have to look at the big picture here. And what I found, really, my generation of leaders when we took over the 59th, is that we were still collecting data the old way. And by the old way, I mean you take an airplane and a new piece of software and you put that software on a couple of elite test jets and you test it over and over and over in a single environment, and you do that for sometimes years, in some cases literally 7 years, before you call it perfect and push that out to the combat air force. And then of course, as complex as software has gotten, you then find a bunch of errors because you've introduced that to new environments, new use cases out there throughout the enterprise. If you think about the way your iPhone, your computer works right now, that test philosophy is completely the opposite, right? They shotgun a new software set out to all of us, 6 billion people, test it for them simultaneously, and rapidly stream data back where they can then make iterative change. And that is what we had to get to as a fighter test enterprise. This was a big uphill battle because we had been doing things the same way for about 50 years, the more even. It was a fight. It was a fight, but it was a very enjoyable fight because I was able to watch significant change take place in even a very short span of time, to the point that we, on the government side, were able to build new technology to capture data from fielded combat fighters, and we were able to create technology to stream that back, even classified data, to a place where we could manipulate it, make quick changes, and very rapidly iterate on these jets. And there are some significant changes in the speed that we're rolling out technology now in our fighters because of this change, this concept of crowdsourcing our flight test data. But from a leadership perspective, what I found was, even though we were making a pretty big overhaul to the way we were doing business, it was fascinating to watch everybody get on board this kind of unifying vision of let's go forward. It's very, I have found now, having led two squadrons, that it's difficult to actually keep people centralized around status quo. That's when if you're status quo in an organization, um, I find that that's when you start having problems. In fact, I would actually define it this way: people either want to be moving forward and kind of playing offense, charging towards the next thing to make change, or they tend to get to a point where they want to play defense of what they have and just defend against someone else passing them, right? It's the concept of either climb the ladder or kick people off the ladder to make sure they don't pass you. And I find that people are a lot happier when they're climbing that ladder, right? When they're pursuing something bigger. And so I had a blast in the 59th, and I hope the people that served with me did too. I think they did, chasing that kind of revolution in flight test data.
Quick ad break here, guys. Just want to introduce you to Shopify. Shopify is the all-in-one e-commerce platform that runs basically everything I'm doing, from my personal website to my business websites. It truly is a phenomenal system, and I have a way for you guys to get started today for just £1 building your business, whether that's personal brand, whether that's e-commerce, whether that's a blog. It has everything. It has its own app store that can get you basically every feature you could expect from an online store, and it really just works out of a fantastic all-in-one system, which I can only highly recommend enough. And you guys can start for just £1 today. It's an incredible offer. Absolutely amazing. And the link to that is in the bio, or I'll put it up in the tab at the top. I think it'll be top right at the screen for you guys right now. So yeah, guys, check it out. Make sure to get this offer, and yeah, get started. It's fantastic. You're right. It sounds like you had a really big impact there, and you made those necessary changes, and it's obviously been for the good. And in terms of your career then, so did that change anything for you then? So when you were commanding there, were you still thinking of progressing that career over to the astronaut stuff, or did things start to change around there for you? And for a bit of kind of aviation, just pure fondness, what was your favorite stuff to fly? Did you get to fly all of it, some of it? What did you go out in?
Well, most of the jets, in the Air Force, mostly through the developmental experimental test side. I did not get to fly the F-22. I think that's an incredible fighter jet, and I wish I had some time in it. But the rest of them, you can check off the list. And I'll tell you, that's a great segue, actually, because you asked the right question. How did all of this align with my childhood passions? Did they change? Yes, they were starting to. In fact, it was interesting. Until you are in a command position, it's really impossible to describe a command position, I find. If I had, even as number two in a squadron, even as director of operations, if I had guessed what it was like to be a commander of that squadron, I would have said, well, it's probably very administrative. It's probably a lot of form filling and taking care of people. That part is intuitive. But what I was surprised by was how freeing it is. How much responsibility, in this case, the Air Force allows us to have. It's incredible. In fact, there's a concept called undue command influence that actually states, like, your boss, once you're a commander of a unit, your boss can suggest what to do in a lot of situations and can certainly fire you if he doesn't like what you're doing. But they're not supposed to influence your decisions. You're supposed to maintain that freedom. that's a big part of our ability to operate decentralized in the U.S. military, right? So this is doctrinal, this concept of undue command fluence. But even though I had been taught that since my very beginning days in military training, to see it in action, to actually feel the freedom that comes with command, it is a very special thing. And so that was a big trigger for me. Even though I still had an application into NASA at that time, it was, instead of it being like I have to go to NASA, that's the be all end all of my life, it started to become, well, that would be amazing. And I have no doubt all of those same possibilities and leadership exist on the astronaut side. But thankfully, they're also here on the Air Force side. And this is a pretty incredible job and opportunity. So it didn't shift my goals. I still was looking to go to space. That was the plan. In fact, the timing was going to be great. I was going to wrap up the 59th, and that was going to time out almost exactly when NASA closed and selected their next astronaut board in 2021. All this was during the pandemic, by the way, of course.
Right.
So,
Okay, so I'm just trying to kind of tie together the timeline a bit here then. So after all of that occurred, were you a Thunderbird pilot before the Thunderbird 1 assignment, or were you going to NASA and then you were offered the assignment? How did it work? So I'll structure this in the way that makes it chronological, basically.
yep. Okay. I better take you back just a bit, if that's okay, to
Yeah,
to
yeah,
make
yeah.
sure everybody understands this, because I know NASA's astronaut boards are probably confusing, especially with the international audience, compared to what you're starting to see pop up: space tourism, inspiration for all that other stuff. But like, NASA astronaut for the United States, government astronaut. Those boards happen every 4 years. So every 4 years, right after the Olympics, usually NASA will open their astronaut board. It is a nearly 2 year process. So it takes a while to get through a series of interviews. Some of them are an entire week long. Some of them involve astronaut quarantine time. They really dig in, of course, because this is a big decision. So that process for me, to meet the minimum qualifications, I had to graduate from U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base. It's out in California. That's a year-long program that you can't even start in the Air Force until you're about 10 years into the Air Force, typically, as a pilot. So I graduated from test pilot school in 2015. I applied on the NASA astronaut board in 2016 when that opened up. That took a year and a half to 2 years. I was a finalist on that board. So I got down to the last 40 to 50 out of about 18,000. And I was pretty happy about that because I was 34. I was young on the astronaut spectrum. Typically that's pretty young. You've got another window 4 years later, and then at that point, you're starting to get into the upper years, right?
Mm.
So being a finalist when I was 34, that was exciting because that post command year now. So fast forward to 2021, that board, that was like the perfect timeline, right? That was, for me, I was going to be a graduated squadron commander in the test world. I had, I had the resume, I had the right age bracket at that point. That was the one. So I had applied to that board. I had applied to that 2020 to 2021 astronaut board, um, and really was hoping that that was going to be the one that took me there. And then to answer your question, no, I had not had anything to do with the Thunderbirds before that. And believe it or not, that was not a life dream of mine. I loved the team, and I had seen them as a kid, and there's no doubt that their impact was there, but that for me wasn't the particular reason that I joined the Air Force. For me, it was chasing that astronaut board. So the Thunderbirds were not they were not in my life at the time. They were the squadron next door. So the 59th is on Nellis Air Force Base, and right down the flight line is that giant Thunderbird hangar where the team trains and performs. And despite being next door neighbors, we had very, very few interactions. Um, so I know you have a lot of questions right now on where this is going, but no, over to you. I'm happy to continue, or
My
you can
God.
ask what's next.
So much stuff to unpack there. I mean, I got to ask the most obvious question then. If some people are scratching their heads right now thinking something's not adding up here, then it would have to be that you were there, you were nearly at the dream, and then you withdrew from it, from the 2021 board, and you took the Thunderbird 1 assignment. So I guess the only question I can ask really is why? What was the thought process there? And I guess, has anyone ever withdrawn from the astronaut program at that stage to do something else? Talk to me all about it.
I can't speak for that. Maybe not. I don't know. I will tell you it was the hardest decision of my life. And to understand it, the context of the background of what was going on with the Thunderbirds is absolutely critical to understand. So the team, the Thunderbirds, if you go back to, let's just snap a chalk line at 2019. You go back to 2019, so just a couple years before, the team had really been through a tough period. So it had had three crashes, what we call a Class A mishap, where you've lost the airplane. It had a fatal accident in the high bomb burst that cost us Cajun's life. It had a commander fired, and the demonstration had gotten to a point where it was not the beacon of excellence that we were looking for in the Air Force. The team was in a cultural low point. I think everybody knew it. I know everybody knew it because our four-star generals were searching for solutions, um, coming up with ideas like, do I pull a second-time squadron commander out? Normally, the Thunderbirds is a squadron command. The Thunderbird 1 is called commander leader, same as the Blue Angels, different from the Reds, for example, where you separate those jobs. But Thunderbirds and Blue Angels, you are the commander of the squadron and you are the leader of the demonstration. You fly all the sorties and you lead all 135 people. So they were exploring ideas like, do we take a graduated squadron commander and basically do another squadron command, do this a second time to bring experience to the demonstration, and to command, to try to rebuild this thing. Now, I wasn't first at the plate. My predecessor is an incredible human being. His call sign is Brick, John Caldwell. He was Thunderbird 1 before me. He was Thunderbird 1 from 2019 when things were really rough to 2021 when it was starting to look okay. But the backstory there is critical, right? This directly overlaps with my time in the 59th. Brick, when the pandemic downed all air shows for the year 2020, really took the time to think this through. What was broken? What changes can we make to fix this thing? This squadron that's represented the United States for 70 years. How do we fix this? Daunting task. And he did a lot. He rewrote the show. He coordinated with the Blue Angels to really think about how we can retighten our formations together. He worked with Disney to make the show more of a bang, like an audience pleasing total production instead of just amazing maneuvers one after another. He showed that this was possible, but he had a lot of ideas for how to make this sustainable, and he just didn't have the time to do it. So if you can imagine, pandemic hits in 2020, his team got extended one extra year. But a lot of that year was taken up by the America Strong campaign, where we were flying over hospitals, and then this rebuild of the team. And he got to fly most of the season in 2021 and just brute force and culture change was able to fly an incredible demonstration in 2021. But the prevailing idea was that as amazing as that 2021 team was, it may not be sustainable because these were 3-year guys, and girl, and they had a lot of training time in the down season. So there was this fear that was one amazing season, but how do you make it actually last when you start the cycle over again of changing flyers out every year, swapping 50% of the team? Is it possible to continue this? And that was sort of the mission he brought to me. So he called me over, had me come and spend a week with the squadron. When he first called me and said, "Hey, I want you to consider applying to take Thunderbird 1," I still remember my response is that I was like, Brick, that's amazing. Absolutely honored, but that's not my path. You know, I'm not, I'm not a demonstration guy. I have no background in it. I don't even fly the F-16. I was flying the F-35 at the time. Um, Probably not the right guy. That was my response. I didn't know much about it. I certainly didn't know what he had been going through for the last 2 years. This was um, all done kind of behind the scenes. And so, fortunately, I walked down the street and I spent some time with him and I got to understand what he was trying to do. This idea of a cultural overhaul for this elite team to bring it back to a point of excellence. And that hooked me. That was, um, I don't know why it felt right, but it felt right. I had this kind of feeling that we were at a crossroads here, a battle between two good choices, right? Continue to pursue my childhood dream or take this mission on and try to build this squadron into a sustainable beacon of excellence for the United States. And I think if you dig in, I would have probably concluded that there were plenty of amazing people ready to fill that astronaut board, and you can see by who was selected that that was true. They're incredible human beings lined up to fly for the United States in space. Um, but with my test pilot background and weapons school background and test command background, I might have just been the right person at the right time to take the Thunderbirds to the level it needed to go to. And so it felt like a mission that needed to happen. And it was the hardest decision ever to reach out to the astronaut board and say, I literally can't believe I'm doing this right now, but I have to withdraw my application before we get to the interviews. And just to be clear, I wasn't selected, right? This was still in the interview process,
Yeah.
but that's what I did.
Any regrets? Do you ever look back in that and think you would have chosen differently, or do you think that was always the right decision and you're steadfast in it?
No, I'll always wonder, right? I will always wonder, but absolutely no regrets. I I know that whatever path you take in life, that's the one, right? You have to commit to it, and that's the road you're going down. And I'll tell you, NASA was amazing about it. They instead of just responding with thanks or anything angry. I actually got an email back from the chief astronaut, Tonto Wiseman, at the time, and it just said, yes. They said, I totally get it. I'm going to miss having coffee in the gym with you. But great decision, and we'll see you next time.
How's it going, guys? Just want to really quickly introduce you to a brand called AV8. AV8 are an aviation-inspired watch company that create incredible commemorations for legendary aircraft and new aircraft too, doing epic projects right now, making these fantastic watches that represent different things. And I am delighted to be working with them. I have some of their watches. They've sent a few out. They're fantastic. And I've got a very special 20% off discount code for you off a full-priced watch. So, guys, I'm going to put it on the screen now. So go and grab yourself a very cool watch. They're really awesome. And if you can't find the link on the screen right now, they'll be in the description too. So guys, go and use that code and see you there.
So very, very big of him to do that.
That's fantastic, man. Wow. Well, okay. Let's dig into the Thunderbirds then. So I guess you went into there with this load of changes, a load of, I mean, I hope you don't mind me saying, but it sounds like problems and things that needed to be corrected and fixed and evaluated and stuff. I think a load of people listening in and organizations, teams can probably take a lot out of this particular piece of the conversation. But where did you begin on that mission then? How did you implement those changes? And what can we kind of pick up and learn from that process of, turning what really was a team that, had a lot of expectation, but was falling short into something that got back up to that high standard professional level then. So yeah, how did you do it?
Okay, I'll warn you, this is a lot to unpack.
Brilliant.
But where do we start? This was a wicked problem if there ever was one. Was Was the problem in training? Was it in hiring? Was it in experience? Was it in um, kind of the people's character? And I think a little bit it was all of it. My predecessor summarized culturally, I think the best that I've ever heard it said. Um, and because of the hiring process, the training process, and how people were joining the team, it had sort of become a team where people were joining the team to build their personal brand, to then take that and leave the Air Force and go do big things, right? Instead of a team that was joining to pour themselves into building the team brand, the Air Force brand, the country's brand, and be happy with just the intrinsic rewards of being able to say, I did this. I was able to survive and perform on this extraordinary elite team. So that shift had happened. I don't know when. I think, as Thunderbird One, you do become a bit of a historian, and you do learn that the cultural waves are certainly there. You can see the high points and low points of team performance throughout history. It's definitely not a straight line. There are a lot of waves, but what my predecessor knew, and what I knew, what you could see is that the exact same jet, the exact same airfields back in the 80s and 90s, the Thunderbirds were flying extraordinarily well. They have very tight formations, 7, 12, 18 inches apart. It's kind of the average that you would see by the end of the season. Just amazing. These guys in the 80s and 90s were very, very good. Same jet. Before that, F4 era, T-38 era, extraordinary performance. You can go back to the F-100. This plane should hardly have been able to do a loop. It was a very low performance aircraft with a lot of crazy characteristics. We got to fly a in-flight simulator. So we have a jet at test pilot school that can replicate everything. And we used it to fly the F-100. It's a terrible airplane. That was something I had actually experienced enough that when I watched the Thunderbird tapes from the 60s in the F-100 and watched their performance, it was so good. And not just relative to the F-100. I mean, like, it was very good on the absolute scale, which gave Brick and I a lot of pause. Why were we not amazing with this F-16, this perfect flying airplane with digital flight controls? And what happened? So you go back to the 80s and 90s, and then you get into the 2000s, and you start to see it drift. It wasn't all at once, but you start to see some cultural drift on the team. You start to see some performance break apart. Accident rate starts to go up a little bit. Why? And there are 1,000 reasons you could point to. Some of it in the influences of the 4 stars that had control of the team that then retired, and no longer had that tight control. A lot of people point the finger there. I don't think that was it. Truthfully, Brick and I really looked to that point I made earlier. Why are you joining the team, and what does that mean for who you are as a person? And as you see the social network era creep up, 2007, 8, 9. The long and short of it is you can see the shift in people that are like, well, flying an amazing show reaches 100,000 people that are on the ground, but taking one amazing picture and throwing it on Instagram, well, that makes me famous. That gets millions of views.
Mm.
And so you saw this degradation in live performance at first with very little cost and seemingly enormous reward, right? Like, I can fly a little bit worse, but as long as I get one good photo, it's going to look really good to the wider audience that's not at the air show. So the focus started to shift just a little bit. This is, again, we weren't there. We did not live through this era on the Thunderbirds, because in the US, you're only on the team for your 2 years. Whether you're the commander or whether you're one of the people on the team, you get one shot, if any, at the team. So this was our idea. How do you make it hard again? How do you make it focus on the demonstration itself again? How do you return to this concept of I'm doing this for the right reasons. It's about service, and we're going to do an extraordinary job, and we're going to ask for absolutely nothing in return. That's the culture we had to bring back. And I'll tell you, Louis, I think Brick and I both went through an era where we thought we were just going to lose it all, right? I mean, can you imagine being new on the team and having this pitch from the commander? Okay, if you want to join the team, you can, but we're going to put you through flight evaluations now. No more getting onto the team because of who you know or how well you perform or how big your social media platform is. We don't care. We're gonna put you through a flying evaluation and you have to perform. And oh, by the way, when you get on the team, and instead of deploying for 9 months a year, we're gonna also deploy for winter training because we need to practice at different sites. We can't just practice at Nellis Air Force Base and then take the show on the road and assume that all the logistics are going to work out and none of the problems are going to show up and spring is going to go great. So we have to deploy more often. The logistics train was going to get more difficult. We were going to train like we played. So that's more time away from your family. And oh, by the way, we're going to train twice as hard. So instead of flying once a day, we're going to fly twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. We're going to get our sortie rate in training up so high that by the time we get to airshow season, it's comfortable to be that close. And oh, by the way, you're not going to be able to talk about what you're doing on your personal social media accounts. Now you can talk about what you're doing as Air Force Thunderbird 4, which is a brand account, right? That then carries on and continues to build the Air Force brand as time goes on. But you can't do it as you, the person, because we need people who are there to build and take the team forward, not themselves. So you can imagine this in the year 2020, 2021, like what we thought was going to happen was that we were going to have a mutiny and everyone was going to be like, nope, that's it's not the deal that I was told this was going to be. And so it was a big risk, Louis. It was a big risk. And we did it. And so the first year, I took command in December of 2021. In 2022, we implemented all of those changes. So we had the first team that was hired by Flying Evaluations. We did our first deployed winter training to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and Spaceport, New Mexico. We really focused on being extraordinary and doing it all as a giving team. You know,
Yeah.
I'll get to the punchline shortly on what the results were, but I want to talk a little bit about. You asked me how did I implement that. Um, Yes, a military commander fortunately has the authority to just do it, right? Like, of course, we can just do it, but it is not that simple. What you learn in military command is, I'm sure, the same thing that is learned from every CEO in the world, which is that you need your people a whole lot more than they need you. And if they're not on board, regardless of how much authority you have, then you have nothing because they just won't do it. So they have to believe in it. They have to believe in what they are a part of. And if they don't, it's going to fall apart. So I focused right up front in my first change of command speech on building the why behind this team, building the what is this all about? Because if you just go out there and say, hey, we're going to fly extraordinary demonstrations and we're going to put ourselves at extreme risk and do it at level 10 out of 10 every day, and we're going to do it because of recruiting, it's not going to work. That is right. That probably doesn't fire you up, Louis. It doesn't fire me up. Recruiting is cool, but it's not that cool, right? Not cool enough to put yourself at such an extreme risk. So digging into the history a little bit gave me all of the ammunition I needed to build the real picture of what the Thunderbirds represent. And you can see it right in the paint scheme itself. So I'm going to go back in history just a touch. In 1946, the Navy founded the Blue Angels. And the history behind that is really cool because in 1947, the US Air Force was founded. So in 46, the Navy knew this was about to happen. They were afraid of losing their aviation wing to this new thing called the Air Force that, for all we knew, was going to consolidate all aviation into one organization. And so they built the Blue Angels, and if you look at it, it's right there, right? They're blue and gold, they're Navy colors, giant US Navy across the bottom of their wings. They are there to remind the world naval aviation is a thing, and look how good we are at it. And that's their mission, and they are very, very good at it. The Thunderbirds weren't founded until several years later, 1953. So now we're in the middle of the Korean War. The Air Force never had a recruiting problem. Typically when people thought about jets, they thought about the Air Force. So that wasn't it. So why the Thunderbirds? Well, it was a time when trust was hard to come by between our governing institutions and our people. It was a fractured era. The Korean War was tough, and even in aviation, people didn't really believe in jets. Propellers were reliable. These jet things were new, and so the Air Force founded the Thunderbirds to unite the country in a divided time, to bring people together. That's why it's a red, white, and blue paint scheme. It's been the same since '53, and the idea was build trust in the American institutions by demonstrating how extraordinary they can be. That was the Thunderbird mission in 1953. And so take that mindset, translate it to what we experienced, not just America wide, but worldwide during the pandemic. Absolutely one of the most divided times in American history. That was an easy mission to get behind for people, to say, hey, we are split as a country. We are just coming out of this pandemic. It is a rough time. How can we bring people together? And the way you bring people together is by presenting something so extraordinary that no matter who you are, you see it and you go, wow, I am amazed by humanity's ability, right? Yeah. By human achievement. That is a uniting force. And then if you can take that to the next level and say, but we're not going to do that as prima donnas who are demanding and who need this and this from the airshow industry. It's not a privilege to see us. It's a privilege for us to present this to you, America, world. If you can be that giving team that also performs at the highest level of achievement, then that's the whole picture. That's extraordinary human achievement. But more than just in the Olympics, et cetera, you're doing it in the name of service to something bigger than yourself. And that was the unifying vision that I tried to bring to the team, to convince them to put themselves through this extraordinary challenge that we were about to go through together for the next few years. I know that's a lot, but I wanted to give you the results because I think it's so telling about humanity. So remember, we made everything harder. We made everything worse. And the result was, the first year that we did this, we tripled the number of applicants that we had ever had before. And by the time we had 2 full years of implementation, so this most recent board that we just went through for applications, we actually had a 14-to-1 ratio of applicants to the team, which is very high considering the qualifications to apply. And even the commander leader applications, we had 14-to-1 there as well. So it was amazing to see people chase the difficult, which tells me that people still crave excellence, challenge, hard work. It's all there. It's all there. And I'm so privileged to have been able to see that unfold, to really believe in that. I'll tell you, it will shape my leadership philosophy for the rest of my life. Because people do pursue the challenges.
They do. It's true. It's a really, really interesting story. And I think what I'm kind of wondering then is just in terms of like the issue there and stuff. You said it sounds like people were getting a bit self-serving then, and people were focusing too much on their personal brand and their career after the Air Force. And I think one of the things the Navy SEAL once said to me was, I think, why do Navy SEALs fail, or what do they do after selection? I think one of the things that he mentioned really was like, are you trying to be an ex-Navy SEAL, or are you trying to be a Navy SEAL? Like, what are you going in for? Are you going in there to write the book and do the engagements and create this career? If you're doing that, you're probably going to fail. But if you're going in there for, service of country, for, that experience and to do that, then it's a very, very different ballpark game. But in kind of, aviation and with jets and in a team like that, how does that self-serving aspect of it, how does that actually translate to bad performance? Like, what does that do to a mind? What does that do to your kind of professional little mental bubble that has such a negative impact on the team? Because initially thinking about it, obviously, you know, we want people who are part of a team, creating team culture and creating something that's, you know, bigger than themselves. But if they're not doing that, I can't quite see what the direct correlation is there to performance in that team. So talk to me about how that affects it.
Yes, that's a great question. And by the way, that is a great point from the Navy SEALs. That's wow. It's hard to put it better than that. That's it. That's exactly it. Um, so it's a mentality, and I think the first thing it's important to understand when answering that question how hard this is. It is very, very, very difficult to fly these demonstrations. Because I've been through all the elite flying programs in the Air Force, and flying the lead jet of the Thunderbirds was by far the hardest flying done. And then on top of that, you do it twice a day. So, you know, that's the baseline is you go twice a day. You don't have weekends. The weekends are the air shows. If you're lucky, you get a Wednesday off. Most likely you don't. You know, I know you've had other podcasts with demonstration performers, so you kind of understand this flow, but it's very important to cage your mind on how difficult this is. So to ask you these pilots psychologically to stay completely engaged through that schedule, through your brief, your flight, and your debrief twice a day, to stay completely mentally engaged and locked on, to focus on getting better, is a big ask. If you are sitting in debrief uploading your video footage from your GoPro to Instagram, you are not engaged. So there's the obvious, right? There's the obvious distraction that it causes on these long days, but that's not it. Um, when you start, your learning curve is very fast. You know, you go from, you know, we can barely hang on in diamond formation in a loop, you know, at 6 feet apart, to okay, we're 3 feet apart. Okay, we're closing that gap towards 18-inch formation. We're starting to push towards aligning stripes. That journey goes from a very fast leap to where you look okay to a absolute slog to get to a point where you are in these elite formations, you know, where you are inches away from my wing as number two, or number 2 and 3's wingtips are just about touching, with number 4 sandwiched in between there, and then the solos rejoining to that formation. That journey from we look pretty good to whoa, we are pushing the very boundaries of possible is very long, very arduous. So training season gets you close, and then once you start show season, you're asking these guys and yourself to keep pushing for literally inches, to keep pushing further and further and further down this road where the gains are slow and it is almost impossible to see progress. That takes everything you've got. And that takes a mentality that says, I am in this to present the extraordinary to the American public, not I am in this, we look good enough. Why are we pushing? I could use some time back. I've got some other things to think about in my life. Right. Does that kind of make sense? That's the best way I can put it psychologically is it takes true selfless commitment to something bigger than yourself to continue to push down that road of extraordinary that most people are not going to notice, but the ones that do are the ones that apply for the team. Or and I think this is important, right? We're not just there to inspire people to join the Air Force to you know, join the Thunderbirds. Certainly not. Such a small portion of the American population. What we're there to do, if we get this right, is inspire the entire American population, the entire world's population, for our allies at least, hopefully, to pursue their passion, whatever that may be, Or maybe it's flying, maybe it's not, maybe it's the military, but 99% of people will not join the military, and they matter just as much. We need the entire population to pursue their passions at that level, at the level where they're chasing it for the right reasons and are doing it to be extraordinary. That's how the country grows. That's how the human race grows. And so there's it's there, right? The motivation to do this, to push yourselves, it's there, but you have to think about that next level. And so it really does require a selfless commitment.
Very interesting. Guys, just to let you know, Talk4 Podcast is on Patreon, and it also has a Spotify subscription too. So guys, if you are really enjoying the show and you enjoy all the past episodes too, and you just want to pitch in just a tiny amount every month, even just a couple of pounds a month or something, to support the show, help me get better guests on and keep upgrading and upgrading what we're doing here, please do consider heading over there and just giving me some support. It means a massive amount. Guys, back to the episode now. Enjoy. Very interesting, because when you're speaking about that, it reminds me a lot about some of my journey too. So something that I noticed in my tennis career was that the journey from 100 down to that 1% of best tennis players in the world, or being in that 1%, actually, or as nice as a top 1% tennis player or podcaster sounds, it's a lovely metric to be able to say to people, but actually it's very easy to go from 99 down to that 1%. Actually, that 1% where you have the top of the 1%, 1.00, that's where good is, and then great is in the 0.01%. And actually, when you start out in something, especially like this podcast, I did do a study recently and found that it is in the top, well within the top 1% of most viewed podcasts in the world now. But initially, actually just starting and being consistent with something like that in sport or in this, you start almost with a bit of a kind of a downhill tarmac run, don't you? You pick up speed, and it's actually a lot easier than you think to get into it. Then you get into that 1% there, and then it's like, okay, now I'm wading through pretty thick, boggy mud right now. And actually, you can't just be doing good anymore to get to that next level or actually get into that great level. You've got to be doing in a mindset and in a consistency level that you can maintain for a long period of time. It's very different from where that top 1% is down to the 0.00 stuff. And it sounds like from what you're saying in there, with that formation, the difference is you can actually see it because you've got a metric that you can measure it by. So, that actual size and that distance apart, where it's a little bit different in what I'm saying, but it just sounds a lot to me like that mentality and stuff. If you don't kind of trust the people around you as well, if you are self-serving, your self-interest is there. If you're, part of that team and your heart's open to the people around you, then you trust them to take care of you too. And you look to the people left and right, and that as long as you're doing the same thing, then you can pull that formation in closer, right? And is that where it all went wrong then? Is that what caused the crashes? Was it mechanical? Was it pilot? What do you think?
The modern history accidents, unfortunately, are very rarely allocated to mechanical issues. These jets are extremely reliable. Now, not to belittle the people flying them, you see all kinds of weather conditions out there. You're landing at civilian airfields unsupported by the Air Force. You've got wet runways and a mission that's really no fail, because these towns get to see you once every 4 or 5, sometimes 13 years. So you really want to do it. You really want to succeed. If you are well trained and if you've practiced your deployment cycles, you can do it. If you're not, these are very dangerous situations. So let me get back to what you were saying about trust, because that's everything. And the team's motto became blind trust. In fact, it's on the back of my speed brakes as Thunderbird 1. When they open up in the burner 360, it says blind trust down the brakes for number 4 to look at. You have to trust each other. And if you have that member of the team that's out for themselves, it can very quickly become dangerous, because if you don't feel this, this happens a couple ways. If you are the one thinking about yourself, then, well, Sometimes it's just that you are worried about taking great photos and not training hard enough, flying hard enough, debriefing hard enough. Sure, that's the lesser of the evils. The worst of the evils is if you start feeling like, well, if my team isn't going to make me look good, then I'm going to start making myself look good. So I will just fly tighter on one side of the formation, or I'll bring my individual maneuvers down lower and closer, and you start pushing in ways that are not the team's flow, right? You start pushing in ways to just show yourself off, to say, yeah, those guys are bad, but I'm good. Look how good I am. That is so dangerous. That kind of individual pushing in a team sport. Yeah, I imagine it goes exactly the same way on professional sports teams when you get that guy. And I imagine it is not a good thing. And the only difference for us is that there's the unfortunate
Yeah.
risk of a fatal accident that comes with the Thunderbirds and air demonstration. Other than that, culturally, it's exactly the same thing. You have to work together as a team. The Diamond Pass and Review, just that simple four-ship flyby where we are in our tightest formation. It's to get it right. It is so asymmetric. Every piece of that is carved out to the inch, um, and the wingtip overlap is 13 feet.
Mm.
The wingtip collision points are inches apart. That is the ultimate trust fall, right? This is the
Yeah.
ultimate trust exercise for the Thunderbirds. You can tell everything about a Thunderbird or a Blue Angel team by the Diamond Pass and Review. If you see wingtips that are touching, those guys trust each other. They like each other. They're willing to get out there and push together as a team. And if you see it fall apart, it tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. I think that's the same in teams as well. You can see it in that, how the team works, that synchronization, and how well that flow of things looks, and also just the performance too. If you've got an athlete who's being injured all the time and stuff, not to say body doesn't fall apart sometimes, and I'm sure it's the same there too. Weather and conditions and mechanical stuff. I'm sure it goes wrong all the time, but ultimately, like you said, if you can see a well-oiled machine working within the team culture, then you're probably going to see the same results out there on the flight line too, and in the sports team as well. But in terms of that then, so you mentioned you saw some metrics that suggested it had worked, but was there a moment for you where you were in a role or a formation at the end of an air show or something, or where at the debrief room looking around at that team and you thought, hey, this thing's worked? Was there a moment, or was it when you saw those metrics that you finally thought, hey, this thing's been a worthy mission that's actually come good, and we're back, Thunderbird's back?
Was. And it's funny, I've never thought of this, Louis, until you asked me that question. There was a moment completely separate from the metrics. In fact, it had nothing to do with flying. Um, we were at our end of year banquet, the Fitz. It's December, season's over, the team's swapping out. This is when we change numbers, and half the team changes over. And this banquet typically is a military banquet, right? It's got a DJ at the end, kind of think wedding reception. But typically it's pretty stiff, and I don't know why, but um, at the Fitz in 2022, it's the end of my first year, when the party turned into, from the military formal side into the party side, I don't know. The team just exploded. They everybody. How often do you even see this at a wedding? Every single person was out there on the dance floor. I could tell they loved each other. They were having fun. Everybody from the most junior maintainer to the to the even to my boss, the 1-star general that oversaw the team above me, was just out there having fun. And if you think about everything we changed that made things harder, right? It just, you would think that it would have caused tension, or made people more standoffish, but the exact opposite happened. They loved each other. I could tell the team loved each other right there, and that to me was everything, because that's leadership to me, right? And if you had to boil it down to one word, it's love. That's it. And sometimes it's tough love, and and you have to be hard on somebody, but it's love at the end of the day. And if it's fake, they know. They can absolutely tell that you don't care about them and that it's not real love. But if you feel it, they'll feel it too.
You're right.
And that brings trust. And so no, when I saw that banquet, I was like, this is it. We got it. This is gonna work.
I think one of the things that kid me versus me now never really realized. Kids we see and we think and we don't consider alternatives and stuff. But I think I always thought as a kid that the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds, they were like a person and a thing, and they'll be around forever, right, and stuff. And I don't think I ever really realized that how often the pilots change over, and that the real Blue Angels are those jets and the iconic things, and the Thunderbirds are the jets. And you made these changes and you did all these things and you served your time there. How did you ensure that it wasn't just a flash in the pan that season, and the next person to sit in the seat of that number one jet and the ones around you maintained what you'd worked so hard to accomplish, and and that the people after them would do that too? How did you manage that?
So I mentioned how much of a wicked problem this is because you didn't know, was it the hiring, was it the training, etc. Well, the hiring is such a huge part of what you just asked me. How do we sustain this? It's all about hiring the right people. You just start with who these people are. Why are they applying for the team? I think it's critical that we select people for the team that don't feel like they have something to prove to themselves or to anybody else. They're already very comfortable in their abilities and in who they are. That this isn't the big thing in their life that's going to like set them apart. And now I was the Thunderbird pilot, so that's it. That was the big thing. I'm done. It's got to be people um, who approach it with even maybe a little bit of reluctance, right? Like a little bit of genuine. Can I do this? I don't know, but I'm comfortable in who I am, and I'm going to come in with that personality. And the way we hire now takes 2 weeks of interviews. 1 week on the road and then 1 week at home at Nellis to see what our real life is like. When we are slogging out 12-hour days every day, flying twice a day and and skipping meals to get this done, right? They need to see that. And then they need to fly in that environment. They need to feel the fear. And if we put all that together, what we've been very pleasantly surprised with is how clear it is what the right team is. Not the right best person, but the right team. When we build the right team, it lasts. And I'm watching the 2024 season right now, and they're amazing. And if we're doing this right, if we continue to convey this mentality that the best version of the Thunderbirds is next year's.
Yeah.
The best version of the Thunderbirds wasn't the 1983 version. It wasn't, the amazing F4 guys. It's 2024 and now it's 2025. And everything we do is in making next year's team better than this year's team. If we can keep that going, then it's going to work. We had to do a lot of work to turn our experiment into procedure, and that took my entire command tour to take this. Hey boss, I promise I'm gonna codify this someday, but right now, thanks for the trust. I'm gonna change a lot. That's basically my entire command tour was that. And thankfully I had incredible bosses above me in the general officer staff that let me run.
Yeah.
And then, but very pointedly, by the time you leave, this will be written down. And so that is done now. So they're following a procedure. I fully expect them to change it as they evolve, but hopefully iteratively this time instead of just control alt delete. Here's how we're rebuilding this monster.
Too right.
But no, it's um Louis,
Wow.
sorry, I got just one more thought on that.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you can write down anything you want, but if the culture doesn't sustain its mentality of selfless service, it will fall apart again. And I think the challenge that Sheik, my successor, has right now is now we're well within that 1%, tennis 1% podcast. We're well within the inches, and so this temptation to be good enough is going to be there someday. I don't know what. Probably not in this current team, but as time goes on, there will once again emerge the temptation to say, like, why are we pushing? We got it. We're good enough. Like, can we take a break? And I think the only answer to that is no. And you have to keep feeding new people into the team so that they continue to have to build together.
Yeah, too right. Really good way to put it. And what's quite nice actually as well is that I didn't even consider this going into this podcast, but actually I'm heading out. I can probably talk about it now, but I'm heading out in 17 days' time to do a filming project with the Patriots jet team. And we're going to Salinas Air Show and going to see the Thunderbirds there. So from what you've just told me, if they're flying 10 yards apart, something's wrong and it hasn't stuck. But if they're flying tippity boo, looking swish and 8 inches apart, I know what to send you in a text message and be like, hey man, it's worked out pretty damn well, right?
I look forward to the feedback.
Yeah, too good. So all right, bit of closure then on this incredible career and story of yours then. So you left. Talk to me a little bit about what you're doing now. And if I had one more question just to ask you on that subject too, is just, do you think one day, you're still going to get your chance to go up into space and have a look down at the Earth from a little bit further up than you've ever been before?
Don't know, Louis. I've continued in the Air Force. I've said this a lot. I'm at 20 years right now. I sincerely hope I can do 20 more. With as I would say, the experiences as I've grown up in the Air Force have only become exponentially more interesting, which I would never have guessed. As a lieutenant F-15 pilot, I've been like, this is it, and everything above this is going to be terrible. This is awesome. And then now, as a graduated commander, wow, it just keeps getting better. I'm excited for what happens next in the Air Force. I don't know what that will be, but even what I'm doing now at NORAD is fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I would never have thought about it, but here we are, and it's fascinating, and it's amazing what these people do. I am continually impressed by just human beings in whatever walk of life they're in. The ones that chase their passion to 100%, they blow my mind. And often for little to no recognition. That is the most impressive thing about humanity to me. And as long as I keep being surrounded by people like that, um, I'm going to stay around in the military. This will be my last career.
Brilliant.
Now there is the slightest chance that this current astronaut board picks me up. It is ongoing as we speak, and I'm getting up there in age for the aviation world. Right, I'm 42 now, so it's a long shot, and I know that, and I knew that when I withdrew from the 2021 board that was it. Realistically, that was it, and now I'm a colonel, and it's probably going to be a different path. It's probably going to be a path in the military as a leader, and one that I'm excited to take.
Yeah.
But no, that possibility still theoretically exists, just as a fraction of possible.
Well, all fingers, eyes, toes, knees, and arms are crossed on that one. I really hope you get to do it. And wouldn't that just be just the loveliest round off on that career? Because the Thunderbirds thing, that was a selfless thing, and I think if you earned karma points, it was definitely by doing that, and I think you deserve it. So I really, really hope it turns out how you want it to, man, and you get that opportunity. So obviously that's the kind of 4 questions done for today. Then before we wrap this up, we always have a shameless plug moment. So Astro, just take a minute to just promote everything that you're working on, the things that you want people to go and look at, things that you believe in, just any kind of social media things of your own. Just plug away. What should people go and have a look at off the back of this?
I think, yeah, I don't have a lot to promote other than just a faith in humanity. Yeah, I know we're all dealing with it. Uh, I just came back from NATO War College just a few months ago, so um, I know that in both in Europe and in the United States right now, we're in a rough time. We're in a pretty divided era. It's if you believe what you see online, it's scary, right? But from my experience, and this is all I'd like people to just take this away. I really emphasize that I think that is what you see online. Um, between misinformation, disinformation, and just the fact that the algorithms of the platforms we all tend to gravitate to amplify the extremes, I have a lot more faith in humanity than I think what you see from the internet trolls. And my encounters with just people, you are no exception, Louis. You're an extraordinary person. Have been nothing but positive. I think we are. I think we're going to be just fine. We just need to continue to recommit, all of us, recommit towards those core values in life. Right? What do we believe in? For me, it's be humble, be approachable, be credible. Um, and if we can all do that, if we can just keep committing to those core values and individually move forward, right? Just move forward, then all this division and fallout from the split, um, I think it'll be behind us someday.
I agree. I think the last question I have really on all of that is, you kind of probably answered it just there, to be honest, but if you could have a moment just to speak to a younger version of you, you know, around that kind of just kicking off, thinking about what you want to do with life, you know, you're just kind of a bit confused about what all of this is, but you've got these aspirations and this inspiration and stuff. Is that what you'd whisper to a young version of you, or would you have more to say? What would you want him to know going forward in this career of yours, looking back on what you've done?
I think yeah, you know, I'm trying to do it. I have two little boys. I'm literally trying to talk to the younger version of myself. It's simple. The real rewards in life are the intrinsic ones, and everything feels better after giving than after taking. I think we all know it. I think we all feel it. Um, but it's easy to lose that as we grow up.
Yeah.
And I think if we can just keep down that road and just keep coming back to that, just remembering that giving is a whole lot more rewarding than taking, life will be good.
Damn right. Great stuff. Well, I mean, that's been an incredible chat, Astro. And I just want to say I'm truly, truly honored by this talk. And thank you just so much for joining me today for this podcast episode. Absolute pleasure to have you on. And I can't wait until the next time. And I hope I get to shake your hand one day. It's been an honor. It really has.
Back at you, brother. Thank you so much for even thinking of me out here in Colorado. It's been amazing to be on the show and very insightful questions. You made me think of a lot of things that I certainly couldn't have pre-planned if I tried. So amazing. You're doing
My
great.
job,
Thanks.
sir. Yeah, it's been great. And yeah, thank you guys for listening. This was episode 122. If you'd like to listen to the past episodes, go and have a look at the channel. And if you'd like to listen in for the future ones too, make sure to hit the subscribe button and spread some love by leaving a like and a comment. Signing off for now. See you next time. Cheers, guys.